Okay, Kondoro. Mlinga. Okay. Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I have the honor to start our session, which will have 3 presentations. The first one will be by Professor John Kondoro. Professor Kondoro has worked at the University of Dar es Salaam and was Professor of Physics. He was former board member of ERB and several other 9 boards. He is a retired principal of Dar es Salaam Institute of Technology and is currently the chairman of the Tanzania Railway Corporation. Welcome, Professor Kondoro. Okay, I will give you 20 minutes to make your presentation, and also I have been requested or advised by some participant to borrow a leaf from Engineer Chogo in terms of taking up your comments, questions, and the like. So please, we do the same, because I've been informed that that has saved quite a lot of time. So we do the same. If you have any issue that you want clarification from the presenters, please put it on paper, and the same will be brought in front for the presenters to respond. So Professor Kondoro, 20 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, engineers. My presentation will be on 50 years contribution, engineers' contribution in Tanzania. What should be done to increase the number of technicians in Tanzania? I'll start with an introduction. I'll go into what the government has done so far, where we are, what is the status, and what's the way forward. Globally, the number of engineers per population is taken as an indicator for development. And we can also see, especially when we look at the developed countries like, or the fast developing countries like China, India, Brazil, and UK, we can see the number of engineers, or the number that the one engineer is saving in these countries. And if we compare to the number that we have in Tanzania, you can see the gap. Now, in realization of this, as the previous speakers have said, when we got independence, we had about 2 engineers in the country. Compared to today, we have 22,200. So we look at some of the efforts that the government took. The government started by creating sufficient mass, in the sense that because in order to get good engineers, you have to start with having a good pool of students who can go into engineering. So the government, one of the steps it took was to abolish fees, so that all those who can go to school should go to school. And then it went into other programs like universal primary education, primary education development program, SEDEP, which is secondary school education development program. All these were to create sufficient mass for people where we could choose those who could go to engineering. And later, as we know, in 1967, through Arusha Declaration, again, that was also another milestone where the government wanted that we abolish foreign curricula and exams, so that we could create a system that was addressing local problems. But also it also created more technical institutions after nationalization of big companies. So we see a lot of other technical institutions being established so that to cater for the institutions that were created. In addition to that, at independence we had only 2 technical secondary schools, but later on the government created more. So as of now we have 6 technical secondary schools, but we also have a number of engineering training institutions like University of SALAAM, of course through COET, Arusha Technical College, DIT, Mbeya University of Science and Technology, Water Institute, and so on. But also it put in place regulatory bodies. We have NACTE and we have TCU, which is regulating our education system. So after all these efforts, so where are we? After doing all that, so far we have about 5 major engineering institutions, which is of course University of SALAAM, we have DIT, we have MAST, we have UDOM, we have SUA. And we have about 6 major technician training institutions, which is Arusha Technical College, DIT, Mbeya University of Science and Technology, NIT, Water Institute, St. Joseph. So what we are having at the moment, we have about 6,000 engineers produced yearly and about close to 4,000 engineers, technicians produced annually. And the goal is to have at least the ratio of engineers to technicians to artisan 1 to 5 to 25. And this is the goal. Now, by looking at the enrollment, you can see that when we started taking statistics about around the year 2000, we had about a little bit more technicians than engineers. But as we moved to about, say, 2015, we can see we are producing more engineers than technicians. These are statistics from the TCU and NACTE. But if you go directly into different disciplines, you can see that some disciplines are really disadvantaged compared to others. There are certain disciplines which are doing okay, but others, for instance, mining, you can see, especially if you look at mechanical, it's very disadvantaged. If you look at, for example, telecom is a bit okay, but there are other disciplines where we even do not have technicians. We have programs like textile engineering, we are producing engineers, we still do not have technicians programs. We have aircraft maintenance engineers, we are producing engineers, but we do not have technicians. So there are so many other programs. So if you look at the statistics of enrollment, it's like 1 engineer to 0.7 technicians. But that is not the reality. The reality is, after that, these statistics degenerate even further. Why? Of course, there are those who, especially technicians who migrate to multinationals and other countries, although there are also numbers of engineers who also go abroad. But also there are technicians who migrate to engineering, especially if you look at the statistics from the training institutions, you'll see that about 20% of the technicians immediately join the engineering training. And also there are those technicians who also go to other disciplines like accounting and so on. So the ratio in the field is much worse. Okay, so what are the problems? The problems that we see is that part of it, one of them was changing of curriculum of technical education, technical secondary schools. That meant, of course, that students could go straight to high school. But Initially, those who completed technical secondary schools, immediately they also underwent a VET, vocational education training programs. So immediately they graduated. Some of them, they could work as artisans, or they could work in the profession, which is not the case now because of change of curriculum. But we also have limited number of training institutions because most of, especially the public, the last public training institution built was MUST, Mbeya University of Science and Technology, which was built in 1986. And since then, we do not have any other. We have also limited pool of qualified applicants, as I'll show later. But also we have limited number of students who pass, because prerequisites to go to technician training, one has to pass chemistry, English, physics, and maths. And there, the average statistic is about 25% of the total population are those who pass these subjects. So already that's a challenge. And you can see these are statistics from basic education statistics. You will see that basically we have those examined about 160,000 per year, going to 240, but those who get division 1 and 2, the numbers are there. So if you remove those who go to Form 5 and join under government sponsorship, those who remain are very few. So that means we have a limited number of those we can accommodate. But also, even if you look at the statistics of those who complete Form 6, you will see those who complete with Division 1 to 3, those are normally who go to university. And the remaining, of course, those who come up with Division 4 can also join technical institutions. But these are the numbers that include even those who are in the arts subject. But even in science, you have those who also have PCB, who can go to medicine and others. So if you look at the performance of physics, chemistry, and maths, as I said, the statistics are also not good. So that's another. But also we have limited range of courses. We have about 30 courses, and as I said, there are other programs where we even do not have technician training programs. But we also have very poor retention of technicians. As I said, about 20% of those who graduate as technicians remain as technicians. We have also poor modality of financing technicians. When we did a unit cost for training a technician, the cost is about 2,220,000 to train one technician. But those who are sponsored by government, they are supposed to pay 130,000 shillings. So that places a lot of pressure for the training institutions in order to manage that, because it doesn't pay to train technicians. But as I said, those who graduate also migrate to multinationals, because the multinationals pay more, so they go abroad. So what is the experience from other countries? I looked at countries like UK, US, and South Africa. They are also experiencing the problem of mobility of technicians to other greener pastures. So the problem that technicians, after graduating, they go to engineering and other disciplines. This is not unique to Tanzania, it is also elsewhere. Also, they have a shortage. They also have a shortage of people due to poor performance in maths and science. But also they have a problem of low throughput, because in South Africa, the study of 2015 shows about 40% of those who go to technical subjects, they don't go through. And also they have a problem of migration to multinationals. So what's the way forward? The way forward would be to increase the pool of science students in secondary school. as the statistics showed, it's about 40%, more or less 25% of those who sit for the exams really have Division 1 and Division 2. So if we can reduce the wastage, it means from even the current pool, we may be able to increase those numbers. But we have also to improve the teaching of maths, science, and English. And if you looked at the statistics, especially for physics, chemistry, and English, those who opt for physics are even fewer. So one of the strategies to increase interest and performance in physics. And the other is to increase the number of technician training institutions. As I said, the public institutions which enroll many, I think they are only about 5. And then the other one is to provide loans to technician students and to improve conditions and retention of technicians as technicians. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Professor Kondoro, for a very good and elaborate presentation. I think we all agree that he has done quite an informative work. Can we give him another round of applause? Again, as I said earlier, I was advised to borrow a leaf from Engineer Chogo in the modalities on how we raise our comments or seek clarification from the presenter. So please write them somewhere and submit that to the table so that Professor Kondoro and others will prepare. Our next presentation will be on, our next presentation will be made by Dr. Ramadhan Mlinga on how to support participation of local engineers in big engineering projects. Engineer Dr. Ramadhan Mlinga is a civil engineer by profession. He obtained his BSc in Engineering Civil from the University of Dar es Salaam in 1986 and was in Construction Management from the University of Birmingham in 1990 and PhD from the University of Cape Town in the year 2001. He is a specialist in procurement, contract and project management with experience of over 25 years. He has vast knowledge and experience in procurement reforms in Tanzania, having been the Executive Secretary of the Central Tender Board for 2 years, Chief Executive Officer of PPRA from 2005 to 2013, and previously he worked with the National Construction Council 1986 to 1993, University of Dar es Salaam 1993 to 2003, and he's now with the University of Dar es Salaam as a lecturer since 2013. Dr. Mlinga has written and presented many papers and articles in contract and project management and in public procurement reforms, both within and outside the country. Please let us welcome Engineer Dr. Ramadhan Mlinga. Again, I give you, I forgot, did I give you 15 minutes? I give you 15 minutes similar to what I gave to Professor Kondoro. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chairman, and participants to this event. My paper is contained in the proceedings from page 55 to 75. And since you have the proceedings, I hope you'll be able to read through. So I'll just try to focus on some key issues that I think are important to be presented. Yesterday and today, we saw that there was a problem of foreign consultants and contractors despite of their small numbers, they take a large share of projects in terms of value compared to local firms. This is one of the problems that we have. And we have a challenge facing Tanzanian firms of getting opportunities to gain experience, particularly on large projects. And I think this was also raised yesterday when we had the opening session. Now, there has been a number of interventions by the government which were intended to improve participation of local firms. And other presenters have spoken about the Tanzanian Development Vision 2025, and this vision puts emphasis on infrastructure development, and of course, through infrastructure development, it provides opportunities for local contractors and consultants. And it's an area that, as consultants and contractors, we need to see how can we take our right share in the projects which are supposed to be taken towards implementing the vision. Then we had, there was a construction and industry policy. This is a policy that was issued in year 2003. And if you read through the policy, because the details are in my paper, from the vision, mission, and goals and objectives of the construction industry policy, you find that much emphasis has been placed in developing an efficient and vibrant local construction industry in which local players shall be able to deliver the services locally and to export to other countries. Now, whether we are now exporting is a big question, but that is the main thrust of the construction industry policy. We also have another piece of legislation, which is the National Empowerment Act of 2004. And the objective of this particular act is to promote and facilitate ownership of income-generating activities and assets by Tanzanians. So this is also a piece of legislation which is aimed to empower Tanzanians in economic activities. Of course, as engineers, we are aware of the Engineers Registration Act, and one of the functions of the board, of course, is supposed to be to promote and provide opportunities and facilities for the study of and for professional training in engineering. And one of the areas where there's been some major achievements is the Structured Engineers Apprenticeship Program, which has been spoken yesterday, and it's there to provide opportunities for young engineers to qualify for registration as professional engineers. We also have Contractors Registration Act, which is applicable to contractors, and this establishes the Contractors Registration Board, and some efforts have been done by the CRB to develop local contractors. For example, they have had a sustainable structured training program for contractors, and also they established the Contractors Assistance Fund with the aim of assisting contractors in securing bid bonds and bank guarantees in order for them to be able to participate in various tenders which are offered by public bodies. One area where a lot of effort has been done is through the Public Procurement Act, and this was the chief guest yesterday mentioned some of the provisions that are contained in the Public Procurement Act. But there are various measures that are contained in the Public Procurement Act which are aimed to increase the participation of local firms in tender process. One is packaging or splitting of contracts. The presenter in the morning, Professor, the PS of the Ministry of Water, spoke about local contractors not participating in some contracts because of the magnitude of those contracts. But our procurement law provides that such big projects could be split up, could be broken down into sizes that local firms would be able to participate. But there is also the issue of setting aside contracts of up to a certain value to local firms only. And currently it is provided that works contracts up to 10 billion should be reserved for local firms in the case of works, and the consultants' assignments up to 3 billion should be reserved to local consultants. It means values up to that, projects up to that value should only be tendered by local firms. Then there is the issue of granting margin of preference in favor of local firms in tenders where they compete with foreign firms. So where local firms are competing with foreign firms, there is a margin of preference of up to 10%. And actually this margin of preference is also extended to a situation where a local firm enters into a joint venture with a foreign firm, and the details are provided in my paper. But there is also the issue of inclusion of local firms and experts in consultants' contracts. This is in Section 55A of the Public Procurement Act as amended in 2016. This particular provision requires that there are two aspects in the evaluation of consultants' tender. First is the inclusion of local firms, where you are supposed to give a weight of 15%. And in the case of inclusion of local experts, on that criteria we are supposed to give a weight of 10%. It's not negotiable. It's 15% in the case of inclusion of local firms, and in the case of inclusion of local experts is 10%. And a firm that can demonstrate that in its proposal it has, I think, more than 50%, either local firms or experts, then is going to be given maximum weight on that particular evaluation criteria. Then there is also the issue of use of local experts in goods, works, and non-consultant services, which this is provided in Section 55 of the Public Procurement Act as amended in 2016. There are also other measures that are contained in the Procurement Act, and that is of setting aside contracts for capacity building of local firms. This is provided in Section 55D of the Public Procurement Act. Basically, this section requires procuring entity working with the regulatory bodies to set aside contracts to be used for capacity building. And the section says that contracts that are set aside for capacity building should not be subjected to competitive tender process, but may rather be let out on some kind of negotiation with the relevant contractors or consultants. And of course, it calls upon the registration bodies to provide support in those projects which are supposed to be used for capacity building. There is the issue of timely payment as a capacity building measure, because we see that there are a lot of situations where local firms fail to perform because of delays in payments and so on. But also the issue of simplified requirements for participation. Now, much as the Public Procurement Act has provided for those various interventions, what is status on implementation? According to my survey, there has been no serious efforts to set aside projects for capacity building, despite of the provisions of the law. I only know of one project that was designed that way, which was Mbutu Bridge, whereby a number of contractors and even some consulting firms were brought together in building that bridge with the aim of building their capacity. There are also no guidelines that have been developed to address how to include key local experts in the assignments as required by the law. Also, no guidelines have been developed to determine the level of input of foreign consultants, contractors in the association as part of their registration to be eligible for the preference scheme. And PPRA is required to monitor the implementation of the preference scheme. And the procurement audit reports that are issued by PPRA do not show to what extent, they do not show to what extent is the preference scheme being implemented. Now, I'm putting my proposed intervention to support participation of local engineers in big engineering projects. As we have seen, we already have a framework that has been provided by the Public Procurement Act. And I think as a starting point, we need to ensure that all provisions contained in the Public Procurement Act and its regulations are fully implemented. Because if you read the Act, it really has very comprehensive provisions, which if we use them properly, we should be able to provide the required opportunities for our local firms as well as engineers who will be working in those firms. I also propose that since it is the role of Engineers Registration Board to register foreign consultants working in Tanzania, it must ensure that a firm applying for registration, having won a consultant's tender, demonstrate that it has included local firms and national experts as required by the provisions of the Act. Also, Engineers Registration Board should spearhead, in consultation with PPRA, the preparation of guidelines which shall be included in its bylaws to determine the level of input of foreign consultants in the association between local and foreign consultants to be used to determine the eligibility of the association in order for them to be eligible for the preference scheme. ERB, again, in consultation with procuring entities with large consultants assignments, should identify projects to be used for capacity building of local contractors as consultants as provided under Section 55D of the Public Procurement Act. And I have written there that same measures need to be instituted by the CRB as well as the Architects and Quantity Surveyors Registration Board. Also, PPRA should ensure that PEs comply with the preference scheme as provided in the Procurement Act. And in this particular case, I'm proposing that they introduce a compliance and performance indicator to be scored during procurement auditing to show the extent to which a procuring entity is complying with the provisions of the preference scheme. Yesterday, the guest of honor gave a directive, and the directive that he gave is that public projects should be used for training of young graduate engineers. And when you look at that directive, actually it is supported by our procurement legislation. It is supported by provisions of Section 55A and also Section 55D of the Public Procurement Act. So it's an area that, it's a directive that was given, but it's already supported by our procurement legislation. And I was looking at how possible can we implement that particular directive. And one way is to insert clauses in the conditions of contract requiring contractors and consultants to accommodate a certain number of young engineers in their projects. And I borrowed an example of provisions to combat HIV/AIDS, whereby we have provisions in the general conditions of contract and provisions in the special conditions of contract, which requires contractors to provide a certain minimum level of interventions aimed at combating HIV/AIDS. So in the same spirit, we could have such provisions whereby contractors will be required to provide training, employment opportunity, and of course training for the young engineers. And of course that is going to have a cost implication because they are going to court for that. But I think we all agree that in the long run that is the only way that we can build the capacity of our young engineers. So in concluding, I'm saying to date, local consultants and contractors are still struggling with capacity and capability problems which hinder them from getting enough jobs to enable them to grow. But through the provisions of the public procurement and its regulations, we can see how we improve that particular situation. And of course, that is in line with the construction industry policy, because the construction industry policy tells us where we want to go, but the Public Procurement Act gives us details on how we can implement some of the provisions that are provided in the construction industry policy. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Engineer Dr. Mlinga, for a very good presentation. I think, members, you should agree with me. He has ably presented the various policy and legislative perspectives and proposed some intervention, including advising on how to address the concern of the guest of honor yesterday. Once again, let us give him another round of applause. Okay, our next presentation, the third one, will be by Dr. Richard Masika, who will present a paper on capacity building of engineers. Dr. Richard Joseph Masika is a licensed consulting engineer, qualified in structural engineering from the Technical University of Budapest, Hungary in 1990. With Doctor of Philosophy in Structural Engineering. He is the immediate past rector of the Arusha Technical College, Tanzania, where he served from 2009 to 2017. He has served as Deputy Chair for Africa for the World Federation of Polytechnics and Colleges from 2015 to 2017. He was an executive board member of the Commonwealth Association of Technical Universities and Polytechnics in Africa, CAPA, and chair of the CAPA Projects Committee for 5 years. He is a serving member of the board of directors of the Loans Board, Higher Education Students Loans Board. He is also the chair for the board of directors of the Arusha Urban Water and Sanitation Authority. He is chairing the advisory board of Malia Sports Development College, Mwanza. He is a member of the editorial board of the Africa Journal of Technical and Vocational Education and Training, and he has a number of academic publications in local and international journals and conference proceedings. Something which has been forgotten, he is also a prolific events manager. Karibu sana. Please.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Chair. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. May I know the contract terms, please?
Because you have asked, it is 16 minutes. I give you 1 more minute.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, my presentation will cover the historical part, has a bit of history, followed by academic and professional capacity building. Then we'll look into the data of outputs from undergraduate engineering training programs from our local institutions, because those, they form the basis, the foundation of the engineers here, and we'll end up with recommendations. I've started immediately with at the independence, after independence, whereby the need for human resource capacity building was very critical, as has been elaborated earlier in the previous presentations. Therefore, the government did put a very strong focus on capacity building through education, and immediately started with the establishment of the University of Dar es Salaam in 1961 as College of University of London Law, located at Lumumba, the then headquarters of the TANU. After that, in 63, the university was transformed and became Constituent College of the University of East Africa. The change really came in 1967 with the birth of the Arusha Declaration, which brought two objectives. One was public ownership and control of the economy, and the other one was education for self-reliance. And continued with that. That changed the education objective to be demand-led, demand-driven, more appropriately, to be more appropriate to the needs of Tanzanian and the Tanzanian society as a whole. Several acts were established to support that, but the beginning of the engineering training started in 1973 with the establishment of the Faculty of Engineering at the University of Dar es Salaam, which it is output, first output was delivered to the market in 1977, and prior to that we had a number of engineers who contributed to the development of the country, mainly graduates from University of Nairobi and the East Europe countries. Now, Tanzania, as most of you know, has gone through three major development era or epochs, and it is economic development process. And that started with the first one before birth of the Arusha Declaration, which was mainly a private sector capitalism dominated by colonial masters then. After that, it became the 1967 to mid-80s epoch or era, whereby nationalization came in, the education for self-reliance came in, and that was guided by the centrally planned and controlled economy. Here, the government did put a lot of efforts in bridging the technical skill gaps through institutions and parastatals and sector ministries. Those in TANESCO, they remember TANESCO Institute, they remember then TTCL Staff College, they remember many other institutions like NIT, the Water Resources Management Institute. Those were established at that time. Come to the mid-80s to date, we have the economic adjustment period, whereby we have privatization and deregulations, which brought in a lot of inflows of foreign direct, the FDIs. And these, some will say, well, it is the same privatization. No, it is not the same, because this first is of our choice. And secondly, it is supposed to be indigenous or mainly the government and the government ownership. So that is the direction. It could be a little bit different here and there, but the main objective was this one. So through all this era, the demand of highly skilled managers and technical personnel was very important. Now, come to 2000, that's when the Tanzania National Development Vision 2025 was launched, and the purpose was to lift the country from low-income country to semi-industrialized middle-income country in a span of 25 years. So that is it. Now, strategies, policies were put in place. The former presenter has covered them, and now, the most important is that priority sectors and priority projects were identified to take us there. And the success is dependent on the availability of adequate number of engineers and the allied professionals with the right set of knowledge, skills, understanding, and values. And that is what in the former presentation by the PS, we saw that there are water projects worth 2 trillion, and our participation in terms of numbers is 17%, but in terms of value is less than 0.5%. So you could see the impact of this statement. Let's look very quickly at the development of engineering professionals, and let's look at the framework for it. This is internationally accepted framework with a little bit of modification, but is the one that has been adopted by UNESCO. It starts with the input from the basic education in science, going through accredited engineering programs, and we get graduate engineers. These graduate engineers, they go through a graduate development program. In this case, in our case, is the SEAP, but there are those who do it under supervision with their employers or elsewhere. And once they are capable of independent practice, they are certified as fully formed practitioners. Those are the professional engineers. It goes further to mid-career practitioner. Those are those who are capable of management and some leadership of technical and business areas. And there's a later career practitioner, which I think we are lacking, and that is why there's been a cry we are not participating in these mega projects. Those are the ones who are capable of corporate governance and leading super projects. But these also, they are expected to transfer the knowledge and do the mentoring. Now, we mentioned that accredited programs. We have academic programs at accreditation, and we have professional accreditation of engineering programs. With the academic programs accreditation, we have the TCU, which accredits universities, university education and allied colleges, including technical institutions undergraduate programs. We have the National Council for Technical Education, which is NACTE, does the same but for non-university technical and training institutions, and the university offered technician programs. Now, as for the size of the institutions that are offering undergraduate training, we have 17 higher learning institutions that are offering the undergraduate education, engineering education and training. 10 are universities and 7 are technical institutions. Looking at what NACTE is doing and what TCE is doing, you see that there's a dual regulation here, which could cause, which is a potential, could cause potential disharmony in the market. We are saying that because the programs delivered by NACTE or accredited by NACTE, those are competence-based education and training. And those offered by universities, in principle, they are knowledge-based education and training, that is KEBET, although there's a paradigm shift towards the competence-based education and training. Now, that needs to be looked at and find a better way of doing that before it causes disharmony in the market. As for the professional accreditation, ERB is the one that, it is the mandate of the ERB and has developed competence descriptors for that. In addition to that, we have the Washington Accord, which deals with accreditation of international accreditation of engineering programs. We have this Sydney Accord, which deals with qualifications of technologists, and we have Dublin Accord, dealing with accreditation of tertiary qualifications, that is technicians. We have the East Africa Community, SADC, and others who have recently, we have signed together free movement protocols, meaning that our engineers have to be very competent to comply with all that. Now, talking about undergraduate engineering in the country, we start with the number one, Mwalimu, because he's the one who initiated all this. And I will go to the numbers because the data are the ones that gives us the pool of engineers which we have. From 1977 to date.
5 minutes.
From 1977 to date, we have, these are the number of graduates we have, and you could see that the growth in 30 years from 1977 was very small compared to the graduates which we, the growth was very small compared to the population, which grew from 17 to 44 million. Looking at the projection for undergraduate programs, you see that it's supposed to be linear that way, but we are having a fall in between from 2018 to 2021. We looked at the potential cause of that fall, and the potential fall goes back to the admission, because the institutions, they have their admission capacity approved by TCU, and looking at the enrollment, there was a serious mismatch, because we found that some institutions, they enrolled even less than 10% of their capacity, meaning that there's a problem there. There are few which managed to enroll more, and the reasons are given there. We have the capacity building professional development program, the SEAP. This was discussed yesterday and today has been mentioned. Here, let me highlight one item, that is the item of funding. Fortunately, that has been addressed yesterday, but it's still stakeholders are required to take part in that. Continued professional development, with this one, we see that the compliance in terms of submission of report is very low. That's what they have found. And the issue here is that this will negatively impact the capability of fully formed engineers to perform, meaning that you find that what is being, it's like the huge person there and the small one. The small guy there is talking about the current issues, but maybe we are very much backwards. And looking at the categories of registered engineers, this is presented in this figure. The graduate engineers is the largest pool with 60%, and that is an indication that there is stagnation or slow progression from graduate to professional engineers, because it's very big and unbalanced, and it is a qualitative risk to the profession which needs to be resolved. Currently, look at the number of engineers we have. One engineer saves 2,335 people, Tanzanians. This is the current, as for the Tanzanian case, we have used the current data, but for comparison purposes, the country I've identified is very old data of 1995. But I use them because their population growth is very small, and this was the reliable number that I could access. We look at the further into the professions where the engineers are registered. We find that there are a total of 15 professions, 6, that is 40%, they are taking only less than 2%. And these are the programs which are very important: textile, marine, aeronautic, electromechanical, and others. So there's an issue here to be looked at. That is the discipline mix and extent. What we are looking at, is it adequate for supporting development of the priority sectors? So that is an issue we need to look at. That really, it's not only enough to have the numbers, but is it the right mix of discipline, and the extent, does it impacts what we are intending to do? That's very important. Now, as the recommendation, looking at the challenges we have shortage of engineers, weak mix of professional disciplines, and low number of students enrolled to undergraduate programs. The root cause first is science and mathematics, and another one we saw that I saw that is a lack of interest from students and a discouragement from parents on financial grounds. So it is proposed to provide loans to all eligible undergraduate students and all eligible engineering undergraduate students. And the reason for saying that is that look at what is the information we have from 2012 to 2017 here. The red and blue colors, those are the cluster 1 and the cluster 2 and cluster 3, which deals, cluster 1 and cluster 2, which deals with engineering and sciences. They are taking very little amount of funds, which is provided for supporting development of Tanzanian youth. Currently, the government is spending about 500 billion annually just to sponsor and support on loan or on scholarship for students. And as a conclusion, I'm saying that the pool feed into the undergraduate engineering training need to be improved, and the stakeholders now have to play the role, us, by promotion of students' interest into science and into science and mathematics subjects, and ERB as well. We engineers have to play that role. We have to show them that this is the profession which they have to take. This is what they have to pursue to be successful in life, and there's pride into that. If we do that, these young guys, they'll be interested into that. We have to strengthen the gender mainstreaming, because looking at the population, 51% of the population is women. Now, if, say, we triple their number, it means that the shortage of engineers which we have now won't be there. It's just as easy like that. And finally, I say that despite this good achievement, continued heavy investment in science and engineering education is necessary to achieve desired targets set in the Tanzania Development Vision 2025 and international, to meet the international ratios of engineers per population, which is one of the indicator of socio-economic development. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I present.
Thank you very much, Dr. Masika, for a good presentation. Again, as we have observed, he has clearly indicated that there have been significant achievement in terms of capacity building, although there are still major shortfalls in realizing the aspiration of the country, and including ensuring that we have the right mix of the disciplines. And he has proposed here and there some intervention, some corrective measures. So again, let us thank Dr. Masika very much by giving another round of applause. So as I said, all those who have anything that they may wish clarification from the presenters, please put that on writing and submit it to the Secretariat so that the presenters can start working on them. As I told you when introducing the presenters, the last presenter, Dr. Masika, as I said, he's a prolific event manager. I only have one query so far, indicating that he has a way to manage the event. So maybe I will start with, while we're waiting for some other contribution, I will start with Professor Kondoro. He has about 40, but most of them can be clustered in a few issues which he will respond. Yes, Professor Kondoro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As the chair has said, several questions are a little bit repetitive, but there are some key which probably would need my clarification, but others sort of addressed to the government. One issue that has been raised, has been coming up several times, was the issue of FTC and diploma. in terms of comparison and in terms of you know, which one is better. And also, of course, there are those who went through FTC who feel that FTC is the really business. Let me say that FTC came in place at around 1970. And FTC was born after the government abolished foreign exams and awards. That was, before that we had city and guilds. We had an honor diploma of city and guilds. So in order to differentiate, in order to make it different, those who established the new curriculum named this award a full technician certificate. But the problem with this is that people took this to be a certificate and not a full technician kind of certification. That is one. Secondly, it did not, it's not known outside Tanzania. Mind you, before 1970, we had some kind of a joint East African Examination Council, East African. So the issue of FTC was confined to Tanzania only. So that has been giving people, or it gave people problems, especially those who graduated with FTC, to convince authorities and even abroad that what they had was equivalent to a diploma. So basically that was part of the problem. But when we now had NACTE, National Council for Technical Education, was to create an award qualification system that was sort of overlapping very well with other known systems. And of course it created a national technical award system. And among these, of course, that's where you have a basic technician, a technician, and a diploma system. It's not that the diploma is inferior to an FTC, because after all, this has been reviewed. And the system as a system, it is actually building, or it is built on FTC. So there is no way you can say it is an inferior system to an FTC award. But always, you know, people would want to look back at what they went through with pride. People would say, you know, the standard 8 that we went through is much stronger than the standard 7. That's they will always say. And people will always brag, you know, the system we went through is much stronger than the system you're going through. But let me assure you that actually the current diploma system has been properly reviewed, and it is in a way better than the FTC. There are people who are also questioning. They are saying the current colleges have been turned into universities because they are offering degrees. Of course, this has been something of a debate for a long time, whether by so doing we are really turning these into universities. But one for sure, we do not have a technical college that accommodates anything close to 10,000 students. So you can do whatever you may wish. Our colleges have remained very small, maximum about 4,000 students. So you can say they should not offer degrees, they should do this, but in the end, we will not attain what we want. Of course, this is also historical. Initially, those who even completed colleges with very good grades, they were denied to go to universities. But also, the needs have grown. You see, when we look at technical education is offering programs that go beyond one ministry. We have Ministry of Agriculture, we have Ministry of Fisheries and whatever. So all these, they have requirements. And these requirements have grown over the time. To a point, some of the courses that are being offered by technical institutions are not offered by universities. So either you say they close so that we go abroad, or they offer what is being offered. And besides, Tanzania is not the first country to do that, because polytechnics have been there for years in other places. If you go to Germany, they call University of Science, Applied Sciences. If you go somewhere, they are there. So the issue is not that you stop so that this goes. Okay. Then, why technicians migrate? The question would be the same. Why do engineers migrate? There are engineers who have gone into other fields as well. So this is something coming from inner, and you cannot stop it. People are saying there is no difference now between technical secondary schools and normal secondary schools. And what is your advice? My advice is that the technical secondary schools probably should be turned into technical colleges, because otherwise they do not serve the purpose for which they were created. The other one is motivation for science and technology, especially in secondary schools, saying that we should retain talent teachers and we should eliminate fees. Okay, those could be also measures, but it is true that we need to motivate students at secondary school level so that they can love to study physics, chemistry, maths, so that we create a bigger pool at the end who can go into technical colleges and also who can come to universities. Because even now, our colleges of engineering, they do not have sufficient pool from which to get the students. We need more, to have more technicians and to have more engineers. Members, I have more than 50 questions, so it's not easy to answer each one in detail as they are. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Can we thank you, Professor Kondoro. At least you have attempted most of those very important ones, but others will be responded at an appropriate time. The next person, the next presenter to go to the podium will be the last who presented, Dr. Richard Masika. Please, because you have fewer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have, yes, I have fewer compared to others. And there are questions around the CPD, indicating that the way it's conducted is not really, it's not friendly. And also the privates, those who are working in the private sector, the support or the support for them to participate in these activities is low. First, the CPD is the role, is the obligation of all stakeholders, starting from the employers themselves. It is of their interest to develop their own human resource, because they will get better product, better services, and even lower the production cost or project implementation cost. It is important for the individual engineers to take that initiative and participate into this, but regulatory bodies are there as well to enforce the same. It's a matter of educating the employers to support the engineers to attend the events that marks the CPD, that produces the PDUs. And there's a question indicating that most points they come, of CPD points, they come from, or PDUs, they come from meetings like this. Is it really adding value to the profession? Now, that is a matter of discussion, but I leave that for the board to look at it further. There are questions regarding the industrial training of students in the industries. The questions are asking whether is it an obligation for the industry to do that, or it is they do it on their own as they wish. Currently, the regulations do not provide for that to be obligatory, but they are expected to do that. I've learned just now from the presenter, Dr. Mlinga, that the procurement regulations, they have a little bit of that. I think we need to look at it better so that we exploit. But as a trainer, I'll call upon the industry to provide industrial training placements for students, because those are their own future employees. But and in addition to that, they bring new generation of technology and knowledge to the industries. So the sustainability of the industry is dependent on the future of the students, engineering undergraduate students, which we have, and they have to be good. Others is questions related to the low number of engineers. That in my paper I've indicated that we have shortage of engineers while they are unemployed engineers. Well, what I presented is that yes, we have shortage, and especially when it comes to the right mix of the disciplines and the extent. And a good example is the example of the water projects. There we have the projects going on now in the country worth 2 trillion, and out of that, only 10 billion worth of projects that are performed by contractors and consultants who are local Tanzanians. Look at that, 10 billion and 2 trillion is about 0.5% or so. Now that is an indication that we have a gap. Look at, in my paper I've indicated the registration by disciplines, and the water, when it comes to the water sector, mainly we have civil engineers implementing those projects. Water projects are more than civil engineering. We need water engineering engineers, and we need people in that specific sector. So it's for academic institutions to respond to that and produce the right discipline, or put to the market the right discipline, which will give us a human resource required for implementation of these projects. I submit. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Masika. Now may I call Engineer Mlinga to respond to some very critical one.
Yeah. Thank you, Chairman. I have more than 40 questions that I'll try to respond to some. I may not be able to respond to all. Some questions are raising the issue of formation of joint ventures for local firms so that they have the capacity to execute large projects. Actually, this is a very important area, and even within the Public Procurement Act, it mentions that where local contractors lack capacity, they should form joint ventures. And this is why also I said that the Act itself provides some preference where a local company forms a joint venture even with a foreign firm, because sometimes you need to form joint venture with foreign firms to build your capacity, not only with local firms. So there is framework for that within the Public Procurement Act. There is the issue of engaging of engineers at a management level rather than just technical levels particularly when it comes to formation of joint ventures with foreign firms. Actually, in one of the provisions that is contained in the Public Procurement Act, and which PPRA is supposed to prepare guidelines is to prepare guidelines that will take recognition of companies, particularly foreign companies that are employing local experts, that are employing local experts and are using local materials. It's a foreign company, but it has a policy of incorporating local experts at all levels, from technical level to managerial level. How can those be given preference in such projects? There was the issue of some people feel that the margin for exclusive preference of 10 billion for works and 3 billion are too low, and actually they're asking how were those determined. Actually, this was looked at a time when this was being determined in 2013. It was realized that about 80% of all works, they fall within that category. And if you look at the number of contractors, number of consultants, it was found that most of the projects that are executed by the public, they fall within that range. So by having up to that limit, that would accommodate most of the local firms. Previous to that, works was only 1 billion, and consultant services was 500 million. That was the figures before 2013. So, but I think there is a room, because it's the minister who is supposed to look at those regulations, and if there is a need, I think it's an area that can be improved. And there was an issue of insufficiency of the conditions of contract that are used for large contracts. And someone was suggesting that in large contracts, we should borrow from the FIDIC. Actually, procuring entity, of course, they're supposed to use tender documents that have been approved, that have been issued by PPRA. But where they feel that a tender document is inadequate, they are supposed to recommend a tender document that they think is adequate for the particular job and get the approval of PPRA. So it's not uncommon to find in certain projects FIDIC being used with the approval of PPRA to carry out certain large projects. There was the issue of how are the local contractors, local firms classified? I think that the classification that is adopted is the one that is adopted by, I think, ERB and CRB as well, that owners, majority share owners of the company, more than 51% should be locals. Now, whether that is adequate or not, because we have situations where, I think one of the other questions that was asked is situations where the foreign firms are fronting. They are fronting some Tanzanian firms to be seen as the majority owners, but in the background, they are basically working for foreign firms. There was an issue of why is the public procurement not effectively implemented? Is it, and the question was, is it lack of capacity? I think there are two issues. There is the issue of lack of knowledge on one side on those who are supposed to implement the act. There was also issues, I think also there are some issues of lack of capacity on the part of the local contractors. But I think the issue of lack of capacity has been addressed, because it requires, where you have, for example, procuring entity, they need to understand their procurement market. They need to understand the size of the firms that are operating, and therefore package the contracts in sizes where those firms can participate. Unless if it's necessary that a contract must be let as one package, then that has to go that way. But they need to take recognition of what is the existing capacities and package the contracts in such a way that the firms that are there are able to participate. There is the issue of recognition, harmonization of bidding documents for government-funded and donor-funded, so that they increase the participation of local firms. I think this is an item that has been in agenda for quite some time, and there has been a lot of effort towards that direction, but some donors, they come with some conditions that these are the conditions that have to be used, and under those circumstances, sometimes it's difficult. But normally, for those who are in negotiation for such projects, it's important that they see some element of harmonization. Okay, there was one, I think this is a question that came from a student, recognition of best students from various engineering institutions in employment. I think this is important. First of all, he said, for example, in the universities themselves. I think in the universities, the first criteria is those who scored high, of course, if they are willing to join the teaching profession. So there is, in academic institutions, obviously one of the main criteria is for those who are performing better. Now, whether that can now be in the private sector where people are employing, I think that's an area that needs to be looked into. The last one, which is the issue of support of participation of engineering firms in projects outside the country. I think this is a difficult one, but I think through the support that is provided within the country, if local engineering firms, local contracting firms are given the opportunity to competitively tender for large works within the country, automatically that will build their capacity so that when opportunities arise outside, they can tender and stand a chance of winning. So I think we need to use our big projects within the country to build their capacity so that they have the necessary know-how, they have the necessary resources which will enable them to be able to competitively tender for jobs which are advertised outside the country.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Blinga, and let me take this opportunity on your behalf to thank all the presenters for the good work. Of course, with the available time, the presenters have done justice to the task they were given, and I think we should give them another round of applause. Okay, and with that, I think I will submit all the comments by the participants to ERB to find a mechanism on how to get the responses. But generally, you have done a good job. Thank you very much, and God bless you all.
Asante sana, Professor Mshoro and your panelists. Another big clap to the chairman. I have few housekeeping announcements, so I beg for your attention. First of all professional and consulting engineers who are here, please, and most of you have no rubber stamps for your, that's one of the important tools. So, and also including certificates and practicing license. If you don't have one or you have not collected, please register your name at the ERB booth for the same. Another announcement is, this is lost item. Kuna mtu amepoteza begi lina power bank, charger ya simu na document za kikao. So if you have a bag which is not yours, please give it to the secretariat. The last one is Institution of Engineers is organizing an international conference. This is 11th international conference in collaboration with the East African Engineering Federation Organization, which will be held in Arusha from 6th to 8th December this year. The theme will be the role of engineers in addressing climate change challenges and opportunities. So please, an ERB will issue 16 PDUs. Also, IET is organizing for the first annual dinner, engineers dinner. It will be held at Seacliff Hotel in 2 weeks from now, and please be attentive on exactly date, but please plan to attend. So we are coming to an end of our session, number 4. We'll break for lunch. This is exactly nearly 30 minutes past 1 o'clock. So we are coming back here at 2:30 to start our last 2 sessions, which is a presentation by Engineer Professor Toli Mbwete on environmental issues, but also to hear from our exhibitors. So please enjoy your lunch. Remember Professor Janabi's advice, don't fill your plates. And can you switch off these lights, please? We have electrical engineers. Yes, thank you very much. So bon appetit. We meet here at 2:30 sharp for the next session.